Good afternoon. Now, can you hear me? Yeah? Oh, good afternoon and welcome to a pavilion home of sustainable agriculture of the Americas. This pavilion reflects the spirit of all actors that compound the agri-food system of the Americas, public, private sector. This is the result, as a matter of fact, of the articulation between private and public sector. The topic that we are going to address, related with the climate crisis in the region, it is referred to the most vulnerable geographic area on the planet to the impacts of climate change. I learned as a Director General of AICA that the Caribbean region has to pay every year a food import bill of about $8 billion perhaps. But on top of that, although they didn't create the climate crisis, they have to pay and face the consequence of the climate crisis. Some statistics indicate that, for example, the damage due to the Hurricane Beryl generated damages for about $2 billion. So the situation is quite difficult. In the Caribbean region, we have a population of 44 million people approximately, with 75% of the region's population living within 200 kilometers of the coast. And the bulk of public and private infrastructure occupying the same zone, storm surges and flooding causes significant damage and losses, which places the countries in a perpetual cycle of rebuilding and external debt. This is why AICA has decided to propose a different strategy. Instead of helping the Caribbean countries to face the damages of the different meteorological events, we are proposing a regional strategy focused, putting the emphasis on resilience, putting in motion a strategy, a proactive one, ex-ante strategy, a long-term vision, trying to help in a more effective way to the Caribbean brothers. Also, we are going to announce tomorrow a resilience fund, once again trying to help to put in motion this strategy. And we are launching in a few weeks a tropical agriculture platform. So we need to help the Caribbean. The situation is so serious and we need a collective action. We have a high-level panel to discuss about this issue, and I would like, first of all, to introduce a friend of all of us, and especially a friend of mine, Álvaro Lario, the president of IFAD. IFAD is a bank committed with the situation of small farmers of vulnerable countries, and he's reshaping IFAD in order to make a very interesting support to cope with this situation. Without further ado, we would like to offer the floor to Álvaro Lario. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, let me thank the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture for the invitation and for the discussion today. As DG Otero mentioned today, seeds, especially the Caribbean, is among the most vulnerable regions. We are seeing it with the sea level rise, the hurricanes, the prolonged droughts, the access to drinkable water, and also in terms of the economic diversification, where tourism is a key part, but also, as DG Otero was mentioning, also the high level or the level of imports, specifically on food. For us, this has meant that we need a clear and differentiated strategy for seeds, which for us focuses on 3 key goals. The first one is to promote sustainable food systems. The second one is to increase rural non-farm jobs and small businesses, which are also key, and also to strengthen resilience to climate change. Our focus is not only on the climate side, but as I mentioned, on saving lives and improving livelihoods. All of the energy transition, the food systems transition can only happen if we also involve the communities and make sure that they are also benefiting from a lot of these changes. The challenges that we will hear probably from the experts today are well known in terms of the scalability, the absorption capacity, issues related to debt and the priorities, the fiscal space, nutrition, and all of these are well recognized, and it's what we need to really focus on when we are talking also about climate financing, but specifically on the link with food security. We know that, in effect, small-scale farmers only receive less than 1% overall globally of the global climate finance, which is around 5 billion. However, we're talking about hundreds of millions of people around the world. So this is a huge I would say, challenge. I'm not going to talk about debt, but clearly debt and financing is at the top of the agenda. We've seen PM Modley talking about the Bridgetown Agenda and having climate vulnerability as one of the key drivers on the access to climate finance. And that's the key core part that we need to also have some solutions, some commitments here at COP, if this is the financing COP, on who are the countries who are going to contribute, what new amounts are we discussing, and for what specifically. Our call from IFAD is that there needs to be also specific figure for climate adaptation, or there needs to be a specific focus also on small-scale farmers. We can also discuss from the Bridgetown Agenda international financial architecture, but I'd like to focus very much also today on agriculture and on some of the projects we have, and to put some examples of what we are currently working on the Caribbean. For us, it's about, first of all, making sure that we are mobilizing funds from the climate funds to these countries, that we are maximizing the impact when we have the projects on the ground, and also how many of the small-scale producers are the ones who benefit, because globally there's a lot of investment on energy, on infrastructure, but that does not always trickle down. And I think to us that's very key. How can that trickle down? We have currently investments in the Caribbean of approximately $250 million, and the focus in the Caribbean for us is agroecology, climate-smart agriculture, and nature-based solutions. Let me put you some examples of how we're trying to work in Belize, since we have the minister here. We're investing in heat-tolerant and drought-resistant crops, such as maize, sorghum, and beans, trying to also address the challenge of the rising temperatures. In Cuba, we're intermixing trees with crops in order to provide shape, conserve water, and protect also soil, specifically in coffee and cocoa plantations, or in Grenada, where we're working also on bringing the community knowledge into the technology also in terms of the early warning systems. So there's a lot of opportunities. I think we need to start thinking on what are the bankable projects through which, and the financial structures that can try to mobilize money specifically for the Caribbean and for the Pacific, and see it as an opportunity of bringing the private sector in. We are doing so already in many countries in the Sahel, bringing local financial institutions, and we would be also very keen on exploring how we can do so also in the Caribbean. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, let me thank the Director General and the Director of IFAD for making the groundwork for addressing this theme on addressing the climate crisis in the Caribbean region and agriculture sector. Now in the panel discussion, we have with us Honorable Jose Abdel May, who is the Minister of Agriculture of Belize and who has experience in several events of climate and what policies the country has been implementing. Dr. Colin Young, Executive Director, Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, the 5 Cs. Dr. Ulrike Kraus is the Program Manager for the Climate Change Program, and Dr. Caspin Dolke, who is the Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management Coordinator. I'm going to ask you two questions. I will start with the first question, and then we go for the second round of the questions. We have like close to 1 hour for this discussion. And my first question will be to Minister Mai. Can you share with us Belize's main strategy and lessons learned from addressing the impacts of climate change in the agriculture sector and plans to sustain these actions in the future?
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed. Belize had adopted a proactive, resilient, focused strategy to tackle climate change in agriculture. It emphasizes on sustainable practices, disaster preparedness, and support for smallholder farmers. But the core strategy focuses on climate-smart agriculture. This includes integrating sustainable land and water management, crop diversification, resistant varieties, resistant seed and resilient seed varieties, and at the same time, these climate smart practices help farmers to adapt to changing weather patterns. They help to conserve our resources and reduce our carbon emissions. We also place emphasis on disaster risk management and early warning systems. And this is in place to minimize crop losses. For example, in Belize we have two crops of maize. We have one in June, and we have a second smaller crop in November. Farmers have learned, and we just experienced it again, that when we plant in June, the risks are higher because it is in the peak of the hurricane season. And so they have moved to planting in November. The only difference in November is that the crop cycle lasts a little longer because of the daylight hours. We have less daylight in the months of November, December, and so the crop may end up 15 to 17 days longer in the field. But farmers have learned to master that already. Training for farmers is very important on soil conservation, on agroforestry. The efficient water use has been crucial. We have areas where we have 20 farmers have 20 wells. But a quarter of a mile from there, there is a 21-mile lake. So why tap into valuable groundwater that can be used for human consumption in the future and use surface water for irrigation? These are the projects that we have conceived under the IFAD project and under the World Bank project. Our collaborative partnerships with FAO, CARICOM, ICA, the World Bank, IFAD is important for providing funding for technical assistance and capacity building and support. One very important lesson learned here is that these plans and implementations have to include the farmers. The farmers are the center point for change, and so they must be a part of the planning and a part of the implementation. When that happens, you will have results. The balance is challenging. As Belize's agriculture sector faces immediate economic pressures, like I mentioned this morning for those who are here. Immediate economic pressures, particularly for small farmers, many small farmers. Belize is a country of small holdings, small farmers. And so these are the people that are pressured economically. And most of the climate financing is not coming now, while the needs are here today. External climate finance for Belize is vital. We advocate for accessible and flexible funding. And this is to support our climate smart agriculture. And doing this without compromising the farmers' short-term livelihoods. Programs that blend grants like the CRESAP under the World Bank, the Climate Resilient and Sustainable Agriculture Sustainable Project. Again, these are loans and grants to the farmers. And so Belize advocates for this type of financing for our farmers. Ultimately, our approach strives to protect the agriculture sector from climate risks and hoping that this can be done at the earliest possible.
Thank you, Minister, in which you identify the importance of climate finance for the farmers to make adaptive changes in the context of climate change. And this goes to the question of to Dr. Colin Young. The 5 Cs is the leading phase of the engagement with your donor agencies in sourcing climate finance for development on behalf of the CARICOM member states. We note that the agriculture development projects form only a small part of the distribution of climate finance funds. How can the lessons learned and the strategies implemented by your organization be leveraged to drive greater climate levels of climate finance to the agriculture sector of CARICOM member states?
Thank you for, for the invitation to join this panel. And I want to start off by saying that I think Minister Mai's last point about the importance of having the farmers at the forefront of any strategy to build resilience in the agricultural sector is absolutely important. Whether if you're talking about food security in general, it's all of the stakeholders that participate and benefit has to be a part of the process. In terms of the 5 Cs, you're absolutely right. We are currently managing a portfolio of about $175 million US across the region, and we have a $500 million in pipeline that should mature by 2027. But agriculture is a very small percentage of that portfolio, and part of the reason is that we are responsive to the member states in terms of what is it that they want to pursue. I have to say, and I think you heard Minister Mai's synopsis of the strategies Belize is employing, but what is very clear is that we have a Green Climate Fund funded project in Belize that is building the adaptive resilience of sugarcane farmers in the north. And I think this project seeks to address precisely the strategies that the government of Belize is pursuing. So in terms of the 3 outcomes of this project, one is to improve crop diversity. So it's looking at varieties of different varieties of sugarcane. Right now the industry is dominated by one variety. It's looking at integrated pest management. It is looking at how do we have seed cane nursery to replant up to 10,000 acres of sugarcane with these resilient varieties, ensuring that there's enough seed to meet the industry demands. And then, of course, to train the farmers in building their capacity. It's also looking at sustainable land management and the importance of drainage and irrigation and again pest management, but also looking at systems and knowledge management. So it encapsulates what the minister was just saying. And so this brings me to my first point about how do we leverage and the first one is we have to showcase the evidence of successes of how these projects to build resilience of farmers not only benefits farmers, but it really benefits the the food security of our member states. The other lesson I think is quite clear is most of our portfolio, while it doesn't have agriculture in it specifically, we take a approach where we try to build resilience in multiple interrelated sectors. So for example, we have 100 million in projects in Barbados that the 5Cs is managing on behalf of the government of Barbados with different funds. And these projects look at the interface between energy, water, and food security. And so you're building resilience across a critical trifecta of areas that are important for sustainable development, important for food security, and important for resilience. Because most of our countries face situations where at times of the year it's either too much water, and at times of the same year there's no water. And so how do you deal with the irrigation when you have too much water? How do you deal with droughts when you don't have enough water? And in the case of Barbados, what we're doing, we're upgrading a sewage treatment plant from secondary levels to tertiary levels. That is going to then be piped to the agricultural portions of Barbados, where farmers can now use that water to irrigate their crops, decreasing the dependence on aquifer. You know, Barbados they have no surface water. It's one of the most water-scarce countries in the world. And it's also in the rainy season when there is excess water in the pipelines, we're going to be having infiltration wells to replenish the aquifers. So it's building, and then we're pumping that water with renewable energy, right? So again, energy, water, and food security. The second lesson that I think is absolutely critical is one around having the local data that can drive what needs to be done. In the case of Belize, it's important that you have a very broad but very targeted approach. So Minister Mai and I were just talking just now about fusarium and the impact that fusarium is having on the sugarcane industry in Belize. And yes, caused by the effects of climate change, but there's also issues around how the land management is being done. What is the soil management? What is the pest management strategies? So you have to be able to approach this in an integrated, holistic manner in order to build resilience. Because if you just deal with one issue and you don't look at the others, the investment is going to be short term. The third lesson is that it's absolutely clear that we build stronger partnerships and coalitions. We have organizations like ICA that operates in Belize, that operates in most of the countries that CARICOM countries. We also have CARDI, we have the 5Cs that is mobilizing resources, we have IFAD, we have CDB, we have other entities that are playing a role, but oftentimes this is not integrated. And I think there's an absolute opportunity for us to work with countries to see what all of the strengths that we all bring to the table and how we can leverage that capacity and capability and expertise and money to then assist the country in their transition to a more resilient agricultural sector, including mobilizing climate finance. Integrating nature-based solutions is going to become increasingly important. Agroforestry, and how do we rely on nature to help with some of the strategies to build resilience. I think that's another area that the 5Cs is working in. And then lastly, as I said, in terms of the fifth point I'm making, I felt like because we're the 5Cs, I had to make five point, is the focus to really look at cross-sectoral projects to showcase the benefit that if you're building resilience in the agriculture sector, not only are you building economic independence for farmers, but the cascading and co-benefits that then accrue to the society, including in terms of export earnings And that broader benefit package, I think, needs to be communicated, because as I think, as the Director General said earlier, the region is extremely vulnerable to climate change. One storm can wipe out essentially an entire crop. And for some of our crops like bananas, like citrus, that are multi-year crops, it literally has a significant impact on your export earnings. And so I think we also have to look at how do we mitigate and climate-proof the industry by relying on crops that not only more climate resilient, but that has harvesting cycles that are at different ages to ensure that you can recover more quickly from disaster. So I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Dr. Young. You did mention about the nexus between food security, energy, and water, and also highlighted the importance of nature-based solutions. And so I come to Dr. Krause. As a program manager for CBF's climate change program, could you share how ecosystem-based adaptation has been integrated into the Caribbean agriculture and the impacts you have observed? In your experience, what are the most promising aspects of EBA for addressing climate resilience, and where are the greatest gaps that need to be addressed?
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. I would slightly rephrase the very first part of the question in terms of agriculture being a part of EBA, and for that I prepared one slide for all of us to understand what EBA is, because it is the use of biodiversity and ecosystem services as part of an overall adaptation strategy to help people adapt to the adverse effect of climate change. And really it has three pillars: the conservation pillar, the climate change adaptation pillar, and the socioeconomic livelihoods pillar. And agriculture links to all three pillars. So in the CBF, the climate change program has the EBA facility. We fund EBA projects via grants. Usually they're 3 to 4 year projects. And of course, good agricultural practices is a very important part of it. ICA was one of the beneficiaries who received a grant. That project has been completed successfully. Soil and water conservation is extremely important. But they went further than that. They actually had a rich to reef project. So they did not only protect the soil and the water for the farmer and prevent erosion, but also prevent sedimentation on the coral reefs, because fisher folks live off coral reef, and tourism in the Caribbean depends on healthy coral reef. And reefs cannot thrive when you have a lot of sediment coming down after every rainstorm. The approach they used was with vetiver grass, and they collaborated with IR Movement from Trinidad, who did a fantastic job with precision agriculture methods. You can see some of the very steep slopes that we have. So that was one very successful project. We also promote the use of native and traditional crop germplasm and animal breeds. We know a lot of crops and animals have been imported into our region. At least they should be non-invasive. And at this point, I like to make a little bit of an advertisement for another interesting ICA event tomorrow morning at 9:30 on invasive species. So here's just the cliffhanger. What we can do with imported crops, at least, and non-invasive, is mixed agroforestry systems. And especially cocoa-based agroforestry systems prove to be extremely successful. Here's one example from the Dominican Republic that I will talk about. So it is really the rich to reef approach that gives us the value added and the climate change adaptation. Because we have climate smart agriculture ranging from rainwater harvesting to good ground cover, good root penetration from perennial crops and from tree crops. We need forecasting and good early warning systems, but they alone are completely useless unless we have digitalization and education and actually reach the farmers and reach the people, which I think in the Caribbean, and I would say anywhere we have small island states, works much better than some of the continental developed countries. And that also links to the socioeconomic and livelihood component. A diversified income is a resilient income. A diversified farm is a climate resilient farm. And here I come back to the cocoa-based agroforestry systems. They are highly diversified. There are some annual crops in there, root crops, the staples on the table, but also the petty cash for the farmer. Cocoa is a year-round crop with some seasonality. It is the main cash crop. It is the main motivation why the farmer actually stays on the land and continues to farm, because there is cash to be made from it. And then you have the timber trees and the forest trees, which is a long-term investment. It is the Children College Fund and it is the pension fund. And if we look at a multi-strata agroforestry system like that, then it makes a lot of sense in terms of finance and socioeconomic. So that is something we have financed in the Dominican Republic and in other countries. And of course, you can add value to those products. Cocoa sticks, chocolate products, drinks. CMOS Farms is another marine. We focus mostly on coastal and marine. So CMOS has very good markets. It is farmed in the coastal waters and then produced into a drink. Coming back to the vetiver grass, the eco approach that was used, it is used in handicraft. You see a little basket there, mats, souvenirs for tourists, but also in the perfume industry and cosmetics industry. So a lot of value can be added. And as I said, you can link that to the tourism sector. Tourists want souvenirs, they like farm tours. There are chocolate and cocoa tours on the islands where you can see how chocolate is produced. And in Haiti, we had a very special problem. The mangroves were being chopped down for charcoal production because they have nothing else to cook their food on. They need the firewood. And by handing out moringa seedlings, which is a crop they've used for many years, has traditional medicinal use for them and also nutritional use, we could divert the attention from mangrove, which is not a pleasant environment to work in if you have been in mangroves, to moringa-based agroforestry systems. So now they are planting moringa. We helped them through the first couple of years, also with annual crops. Now they can harvest moringa for the seeds, for the leaves, for all the value-added products, but also for the firewood that they need to burn because it is a very fast-growing crop. And you see some of the high-end products there on the slide. And the last part of the question was where I see the main gaps. We fund only projects. We need mainstreaming. We need governments to come on board. We need the private sector to come on board to make us permanent, and the small and medium enterprises to thrive. And we need value chains, and value chain development and marketing require very different skills to what we have as technocrats. So we need to think about that also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kraus, in which you mentioned of the importance of using a land-seascape nexus or continuum for the planning, and which is very important to look at the resilience of these landscapes in terms of how do you look at the risk management, and also of the need for mixed systems and the gaps which identify the lack of policies, etc. So I'll pass on to Mr. Crispin. The OECS is made up entirely of the SIDS, small island states, as most of the Caribbean geographic region. And we know many SIDS remain the most vulnerable to climate change. In your view, to what extent are Caribbean SIDS ready for climate change, and what strategic actions in the OECS is implementing to enhance readiness and climate action of its member states?
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. You've asked a question for the ages. But yes, the OECS, for those of you who don't know, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States consists of 11 countries. I'll name them: Anguilla, Antigua and Barbuda, British Virgin Islands, Dominica, Grenada, Guadeloupe, Martinique, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I think I've mentioned all. Did I leave out Commonwealth of Dominica? And Montserrat, probably. Okay, forgive me, I just got off a plane a couple hours ago. So if I sound like I'm forgetting, that's because I'm still jet lagged. Yes, so the interesting thing is you ask how ready are they. That is a two-edged question, a double-edged question, because in the first instance, we would like to think that, you know, in terms of resilience, that we should be as resilient as possible. On the other hand, if we say we're ready, that means we're accepting climate change as a status quo, right? We're accepting it, you know, as an inevitability, and that, you know, we've resigned ourselves to a kind of fate. So, you know, I just want to play that, you know, that dichotomy here. But in terms of resilience, the member states are striving in all sectors, and, you know, they're trying to build the resilience, trying to, you know, become, you know, so to be able to withstand that onslaught of climate change, which I think it is fair to say has evolved more rapidly than, you know, than had previously been assumed. Because when I started in the climate change business, for want of another term, about a quarter of a century ago, when we spoke about climate change, people figured that, you know, by the time climate change got to their doorstep, they'd be dead. It would be their grandchildren dealing with it. Okay? So in other words, it's not my problem. In fact, the image they tended to conjure in their minds was, you know, polar bears on an ice floe somewhere, something very remote. But we've seen that it's evolved very rapidly. We've seen the storms intensify, and, you know, as I think Dr. Young said, when a hurricane passes, it engulfs an entire country. It destroys an entire economy. In fact, more than one economy, you know, in its route for the Caribbean. And sometimes, in the case of a Dominica with Hurricane Maria, for example, it takes, you know, 2 years of GDP all at once. All right. So these are the realities. So yes, Dominica, for example, said it, you know, has been striving to become the world's first climate resilient country, and so they've taken action in terms of housing, for example. You're making their buildings more resilient, building to new standards, and so on. So there is resilience there, but in agriculture, it is challenging to become fully resilient. If you're planting bananas, for example, you know, bananas are going to, because of the nature of the crop, they're easily blown down, and you depending on the size of your banana plant or your spread of bananas across the island, you'll be losing millions of dollars overnight. And if you're into nutmeg and other tree crops, in the case of a Grenada, as happened on the Ivan, it takes years to recover. Okay, because even if you replant tomorrow, you're not going to, your trees are going to take 3 years to start to produce again, 4, 5, 6 years to really get into full production. So it depends how you define resilience. Well, you can consider resistance and resilience. Resistance is the ability to withstand and not be damaged. Resilience is, it also incorporates the ability to bounce forward, not just bounce back, bounce forward. Okay, because in other words, you don't necessarily want to come back to what you were before, but you want to come back stronger. Okay, we say build back better, but, you know, we talk about bounce forward. Okay, so in that respect, you know, the countries are trying their best, but finance remains an issue. Okay, because, you know, when we were doing an evaluation of the revised nationally determined contributions of the 6 independent countries in the Eastern Caribbean, the OECS, the estimate was approximately $4 billion US to fulfill those needs. These, you know, by 2030, the countries, their budgets, they can't meet that in their own budgets, and they have said that most of the NDCs were conditional, that contingent upon external support. But that support has not necessarily come flowing in buckets. It comes in a trickle. You have to fight really hard for it. Okay, so I want to put that in context. The other thing, as we're talking about agriculture, I want to pivot to agriculture. We, in the Eastern Caribbean at least, in many of the islands, the reality is climate change is not the only problem. Climate change is actually an additional layer of stress, because in some cases you have problems with securing adequate labor to man the farms. You have problems or situations, I should say, where countries have moved out of agriculture, for example, monocrop agriculture, and they've embraced tourism. Now, tourism, yes, it brings in the money, but it places a demand on there's a demand for food. And so sometimes there's a challenge between what are you growing for domestic consumption or for the tourism enclave, if you want to call it that. So that has implications for food security. There's a whole issue of productivity. There's a whole issue of in some countries, you have a situation where the farming community is an aging community where young people are not coming into agriculture. So these are some of the realities we have to consider, and climate change adds another layer onto that. So any solutions, if you're trying to build resilience, you have to try to build a resilience that isn't just in dealing with the resistant seeds and the resistant crops and the new farming techniques, but it has to be an agriculture that engages young people. For example, how can you marry the information technology into and solar and other things that excite young people to get them into agriculture, to get them into things like into things like hydroponics, and using that kind of the new technologies to manage their production, because for many of them the dig and plant kind of agriculture does not appeal to them at all, and that is a reality in the region. And so if we're looking to build resilience and just purely talk about the seeds and so on, we're not going to get very far in certain circumstances. So we have to bear that in mind. But from an OECS perspective, we've been doing a lot of work at the community level, trying to build resilience at the community level with, for example, with projects that not just build physical resilience, but also enhance livelihoods. And for example, we've been promoting things such as agroforestry. We have a project will soon come on stream that is looking at agroforestry in a number of countries, but focus at the community level. We also have been working in areas such as honey production. And interestingly, you talked about mangroves earlier on in Haiti. Mangroves actually, especially black mangrove, is a good source of a good pollen source for bees and so on. So looking at the possibilities and the opportunities for incorporating these things, that aspect of things. The other thing before I wind down is to recognize that although the Caribbean is a region of small islands, and although the islands are, at least in the Eastern Caribbean, are generally close together, in many cases you can see one island, from across the waters. There's a great degree of diversity in the geography, right, and the climatology for one of these islands. Because somebody talked about Barbados being water scarce, highly water scarce, but a lot of that is based on the nature of the soils, its topography, its geology. Okay, it's limestone. St. Lucia, Grenada, Dominica, they have more surface water. If you go further north to Anguilla and so on, it's a different scenario because, again, the climate, the geology is different. And so we have to be looking at what works in these countries, what form of agriculture. For example, although there was cotton production and so on way back when in Anguilla, you don't get much agriculture now. But there are opportunities for a kind of a semi-arid agriculture if you're looking at tamarinds, jennet, and other crops which can be used, to really not just they can be used not just for raw food consumption in terms of the raw product, but also in terms of processing and innovative products. So I think that is a way we'd have to go. Again, like I said, in terms of innovation, engaging the youth, and really mapping a kind of an agriculture that is suited to the socioeconomic and geological and climatological conditions of the respective countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Caspian, for the interventions in which you mentioned that climate change is one of the problems. And there are many other problems like labor shortages that you have, and the need for more systemic approach in terms of you look at the problems when you're looking at the resilience and how do you build back better into that here. So I go to the second round of questions, and I'll ask you to stick into not more than 3 minutes in your response so we can advance. To Honorable Minister Mai, Belize has been taking up many strategies in terms of long-term, short and long-term strategies to look at the economic pressures. You have a blue economy, a blue bond. You have other strategies on green economy. Can you inform us how this has been? What are the metrics you're going to use in terms of looking at the change over time or the impacts of what these strategies are working on?
Yeah, the blue bond strategies, and we understand that Belize was the first to implement such a strategy. Understand that El Salvador is doing it with water now. But again, the challenge is education and policy. So we have to implement policies that will protect the vulnerable areas. Our strategy has to be a bigger one that includes not only the forests, the coral reefs, but also our ways of living. For some reason or the other, and I don't know if we all have this problem in the Caribbean, but garbage disposal is a problem. So we are signatories to a blue bond, but our people continue to be very, what should I say, reckless in garbage. And I don't know if it's a thing of the region. And disposing of garbage the proper way is also a limitation. And so the Department of Environment, the other line ministries are having problems to deal with the garbage problem. And so if we are to move forward with further actions like these, there must be greater participation from the ministries, and there must be greater regulations to deal with this. Because those who are financiers of the bond also want to see that this is a country where you can come and see it clean and that you're protecting your reef. Again, the issue of plastics. Another matter that has been brought to our attention, we passed regulations to regulate plastics that are what's the term used? That degrade quickly. And the challenge out there is that there are not much companies that manufacture the types of plastics that we have on our standards. So it's a very, I don't know if we copied and paste the law from somewhere, but it creates problem for us. And so we have to look at this holistically to see how we can solve it. I met with the manufacturers and the regulators in Mexico, and they said, but we had the same problem when we passed regulation. They said we put our hats so high, and then nobody could meet the regulation. So we have to be very practical, and as young countries that are implementing these measures, we have to be, because there are consultants and there are consultants. And they will come and say, you need to do this to this standard, and therefore you realize that you cannot meet the standards. And so the law becomes useless. So we have to be very mindful of what we are doing.
Thank you, Minister Mai, in which you mentioned the importance of looking at education and the behavioral change to achieve the objectives. And also, I think we need to look at more intersectoral policies. How do you bring the health ministers, the education, agriculture, environment, and the Minister of Finance together to look at a One Health approach, perhaps, and looking at this and what changes are going to be in the institutional reforms that you're going to have to address these complex issues. So the second question to Dr. Young. We note that the capacity for the timely development and execution of climate-related projects has been a serious challenge in the region. How can Caribbean countries create more effective partnerships to overcome this hurdle and execute more impactful agriculture projects in the region?
Thank you. I'd be brief, but 5 quick points. Are people hearing? 5 quick points. One, I think it's clear that we need greater regional collaboration. Right on this panel here, we have OECS, we have the 5 Cs, we have governments, we have the Biodiversity Fund. If we were to look at the national adaptation plans of our countries, particularly NAPs for agriculture, you will realize that there's actually quite a bit of similarities, irrespective of things like the geology and geography, that because climate change impacts us in different ways. I think that we could actually pool the expertise, pool the resources, the best practices. We have ECA, we have CARDI, we have UE and other entities. So enhance regional collaboration. The other issue is around PPPs. I think engaging the private sector, small-scale farmers, the government then can look at how they can find resources through grants or through recurrent revenues to put in their national development banks who have greater risk taking to then have results payment type arrangements with farmers to fix some of the non-climate change related risk factors like poor land management techniques. So if farmers do certain behaviors that you want to encourage, they get grants to then offset some of the costs, which can be used at the development bank to help provide the guarantee to the bank to get back their money. Then obviously at the end of the day, it's access to finance. So we need to have bankable projects being prepared and submitted. And again, we have a tremendous network of persons in our region. We have ECA, we have 5Cs, we have CDB, we have OECS, we have other entities, IFAD. We have to stop working in this siloed approach. And the governments come up with a strategy for adaptation in the agricultural sector, and then they approach the different entities and say, this is what you can do, this is what you can do, this is what you can do, based on your skill sets, based on your expertise and your track record. And then you approach it in a very systematic way. And then lastly, we cannot forget the constant need for R&D and research and development to help inform some of our strategies for resilience. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Young, in which you mentioned the importance of having more regional collaboration and also breaking the silos and working together on using a systematic approach for looking at the finance and the implementation of projects. And this goes and this follow-ups with Dr. Kraus. With financial resources often limited, what innovative funding models, partnerships, or strategies is the CBF exploring to support climate adaptation in the Caribbean in Caribbean agriculture? How can these models be leveraged more broadly to ensure sustainable financing for EBA initiatives that will help the implementation and change?
Thank you. So the CBF has 3 programs, and I have to mention all 3 of them quickly. The oldest is the Conservation Finance Program, and that is really unique. It is an endowment fund, so the funds are invested, and the countries who want to benefit from them have sub-accounts, approach us for help to set up a national conservation trust fund. We help them to get all the governance and everything in place. I will not go into any detail. And then they can harvest from the revenue up to 4% per year, spend it on conservation projects of their priorities and choosing, because every country is different. The climate change program, EBA facilitates a sinking fund, as is, and Minister Mai will be interested in that, the nature-based economy, circular economy facility is a similar sinking fund. We give grants for 3-year projects or so, but that money will be used up. And of course, it is not sustainable as such, but we do have a very solid mechanism in place to get funds to all these countries. And some of these countries, all of them are very different, as was mentioned by several speakers, but also some are quite tricky to work in. Trying to get money into Cuba, very few agencies can do it, the CBF can. Trying to get money work in Haiti, very few agencies can, the CBF can. So we have this mechanism sorted out. We worked on that for 10 years. So hopefully donors will recognize that and give us the money to top up our sinking funds so we don't run out in 2030, as is currently the case for the EBA facility. But yeah, those 3 to 4 year projects, they can only be seed money to get small and medium-sized enterprises running. Afterwards, they should be self-sustaining. They are not fully. And that's why I'm coming to the Conservation Trust Fund, because they can actually be a weaning mechanism. Many of our grantees are reluctant to go from a $2 million project down to a $20,000 project. But that is all what is weaning is about. You should start standing on your own feet, and there might still be one gap. Say it is in marketing or in value added, where you need some more funding. And that's where the National Conservation Fund comes in. And that is really unique, and I want you to understand that. When the National Conservation Trust Funds hand out their first payment, they don't have to provide any counter finance, but they have to start thinking about how to fundraise. The second payment, they still don't have to pay anything, but they have to have something in place and developing. And then there's an incremental increase. So from the third payment onwards that they receive from the revenue of the sub-account with the CBF, they have to add a higher percentage of own finance, be it from government, be it from the private sector, from other donors, it doesn't matter. But they have to go up with their own contribution, their own fundraising up to the sixth payment, by which time it is matching. Our contribution from the CBF does not go down. That is based on revenue and how much they use the funds. But they have to learn to fundraise and supplement that until it is fully matching. And really, yeah, coming back to mainstreaming, we need governments to put that into their programs, to have the legislation, regulation, but also enhance voluntary compliance, because enforcement will never get everything done what we want to achieve. And we as technocrats have to find the right entry points, agricultural sector, tourism sector, etc., where our interests overlap. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kraus, in which you mentioned of the importance of the trust fund. I think Belize has a trust fund in the PAC, looking at protected areas. There are also experiences in Ecuador, or also experiences where many of the countries are looking at debt swaps now for nature as some of the innovative financing schemes, and it would be good if we can look at what are the experiences and how that they can be applied also within the Caribbean region, understanding that many of these countries have got debts. So I'll go to Mr. Crispin. And it's also about finance. Public-private partnerships are increasingly recognized as essential for achieving climate resilience. How is the OECS supporting the establishment and strengthening of such partnerships as it relates to building climate resilience in the agriculture sector of the Caribbean?
Thanks for the question. And I want to say that, first of all, the role of the private sector is critical. And I do recall that speaking before I worked with the OECS, when St. Lucia experienced the ravages of Hurricane Thomas in 2010, one of the things that the private sector did was to hand out seeds and material and other agricultural materials to the farmers, their suppliers, to get them back into production. The first thing they started to get was green produce, vegetables and so on, and that helped to tide the farmers over until they were able to move back into their other crops. So the private sector can play a critical role in the whole resilience chain, and certainly in the supply chain. Within the OECS, one of the things that we've done, we've worked with, for example, one of our partners, PIRAC, to build resilience, to help to train the private sector, build capacities within the private sector, so they can start to map out what their needs are, and map their own vulnerabilities. Okay, and we see that as a starting point for actually beginning to work with the wider private sector and with the agricultural community to so they can understand what their vulnerabilities are, plan accordingly. In other words, don't always rely on someone to come and tell you what your issues are, what your concerns are, and what your needs are in terms of vulnerability, and then expect that you will necessarily get a grant in every circumstance. But being able to understand and map out and see what your vulnerabilities and how to build your resilience. So when you add that up to whatever government is able to provide to, fine, but that's good. But in the meantime, you need to learn that capacity, to build that capacity. Another thing that we've been looking at is also the whole issue of how do I say, spreading risk and how would I say, and using insurance as a tool, because one of the things that the Windward Islands pioneered way back when in the 70s and 80s was the whole idea of crop insurance. There was something called wind crop, which when a hurricane passed and crops were destroyed, the bananas were destroyed in particular, the farmers would get a payout and so on. I know that CRIF has been working on some bespoke products, some customized products for small operators and so on, in terms of so they can get a payout, okay? Because again, the government can only do so much, okay? And the government looks at the broader picture, but the micro insurances and so on, we see that as a tool to really help people, to be able to get back into production quickly, to recover. So these are some of the things that we've been working on and looking at popularizing these and increasing the uptake. Thank you.
Let's take free questions. Let's take free questions. You just ask.
Yeah. So thank you, Mr. Crispin. You mentioned about the agriculture insurance. The CARICOM now was launched an agriculture insurance scheme recently. It will be very interesting to see how this will be evolve in time and tested in the context of the climate crisis we're experiencing. Now I open the floor for questions from the audience, if anybody has some burning questions to ask. Can you state your name and which organization you work at?
And now? No? No?
What's that?
And now? Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Marcela. I'm from Brazil, and I'm an environmental engineer there, and I work in an artificial intelligence company for agriculture. So we help farmers to reduce the use of incomes and water and herbicides use. And for me, my question is, when you see the change about the world for sustainability agriculture, do you believe that artificial intelligence can help the farmers in this change, and we can help them to manage the primary data on the field, and it can help us to put this agriculture in a climate change way and help the world with artificial and robotic intelligence? Thank you.
Who wants to give a start? Hello.
I mean, I think the quick answer is absolutely. Right, I think what artificial intelligence, and in Belize, I think there's already, between the miller and the farmers, artificial intelligence is already being deployed to not only look at resilience, but also in terms of productivity. And along with machine learning, I mean, the ability to ingest vast amounts of data to start to look at microclimates, for example, and look at the risks associated with susceptibility of pests and management. So I think it's a green field of areas. I think what comes back to, again, to at the end of the day, we're talking about people's lives. and their livelihoods. And farmers will obviously have an interest in anything that can help build their resilience. It's the how. How do we roll it out in such a way that it's practical and it's useful in a way that it's not just promises, but it can be done in such a way that they can maybe a pilot phased approach, so that as they look at their friends or their neighbors and they see how it's being utilized, then they can sort of get on the bandwagon. I think ministries, governments, donors, partners need to be able to showcase the success of employing ML, machine learning, and AI, and then use that as a way of scaling it up.
Thank you. We can take one more question or two. Yes? He has a question also. Two questions. Court, we can take both questions and then we're going to ask the responses from them. So.
Well, thank you so much. So my name is Edward Chidombe Msisa from Malawi. I'm an agri-entrepreneur. My question goes to the first presenter. You did mention about the youth engagement in the agricultural sector. And one of the key challenges that the youth encounters when they want to venture into agriculture is about the capital, and especially the over-reliance on the chemical fertilizers. Now, looking on the opportunity of agroecological farming practices, especially on the use of organic fertilizers, I just wanted to know maybe the best practices that can be adopted in promoting the use of agroecological farming practices and and as well as the use of organic fertilizers in ensuring that more youth ventures into agriculture, especially on aspect of agricultural production.
Thank you. Veronica Ruiz from the Central American Bank of Economic Integration. I just want to ask, and maybe afterwards I will just speak with some of you, but I really want to understand what is your experience in insurance, basically in crops and food security. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask the panel to respond. Mr. Crispin, do you? Crispin.
Sure. Thanks. First of all, thank you for your intervention regarding the youth. And it in our part of the world is a critical issue because, as I've said, the farmers are aging. But I believe the opportunities are there. You see a few young entrepreneurs who, for example, St. Lucia is a case where we used to produce coconut oil, but for some reasons which I will not go into now, coconut oil went out the window. But now there are some young entrepreneurs who are trying to get back into the business using new techniques and so on. They're embracing hydroponics. And I think organic farming, and comes in, is an opportunity. Of course, because we're small, we tend to have relatively high cost of production, and achieving economies of scale is an issue. But I think niche markets and new crops, I think, is an opportunity to leverage all of these things and bring it together and create kind of a new opportunity for the youth. But I just want to say, in some countries also, like again using St. Lucia, the government has embraced a concept called a youth economy, where they try to make resources, financing available for young people to go into business. The whole issue of crop insurance, it has been tried. It has worked in some situations. Okay, the reasons why they have not always been continued, I cannot speak with great authority on this, but somebody else may want to take a shot at it.
Briefly on the AI, I think in St. Lucia and in many of the small island states, it would make a lot of sense for marketing, because we have a huge food import bill, but also we have a lot of food go to waste. And when you talk to farmers, they often say, we don't have markets. So something that connects, almost like an Uber Eat, a farmer get it to the cruise ships. The cruise ship buy all their food in Miami and leave all their garbage on our small island states to take care of. That has to change. And we can produce enough, and we can work towards the islands actually benefiting from cruise ships coming into our ports. On the insurance, very briefly, I heard the earlier presentation, absolutely fascinating in the CARICOM pavilion. But we also have to be careful not to just hand out money after an event. I remember the old Stabex funds for the bananas. And even nowadays, we have some project farmers who only farm for the next payment or for the next project to come, have zero interest in agriculture and doing any of the hard work on the farm. when somebody comes in and helps them rehabilitate, I always insist at least matching labor. If you do not have the labor, there's no way you can maintain your farm. And sometimes I get headwind on farmers who have always been the beneficiaries. I say, no, I don't want to always have been. I want the young ones who are serious and who will continue in future. Thank you.
Thank you. To the young man from, what's the question about the farmers? Sugar industry in Belize is for 50 years now. The same cane farmers 50 years ago that are alive are still there today. The younger ones have left. The young agriculture first, and when you were growing up, there used to be a little penalty thing, a punishment thing. If you fail, you do poor in class, you go into farm. It was seen as a punishment, right? It has to be attractive. What attracts a youth to agriculture? Simple. Not hard work. It's this. If there is not this, it's a business. If there's no business, the young man will find something else to do. So it's profit driven. If you cannot work on the farm to make money to pay your studies, then you won't take it. That is the problem we have with sugar industry in Belize. My two sons said that no more sugar cane. Cane kill Abel, no, you're gonna kill me. No, I'm leaving this. Because it's not attractive to them. So they seek other ways to generate income. So they look at cattle, do the study and say, hey, cattle is the way to go. So it has to be profit-driven, one. Two, on AI and technology, it will play a critical role in today's agriculture. Climate change is going to eat us up if we do not do something about it. I have seen technology and I've seen so much good things that are out there today. Now, I'm not too good at technology like the kids are, but I've seen that they have a drone and they fly it over your farm and they tell you your grass is lacking A, B, C, and D, apply this. That is the way that we need to go. Dealing with fusarium. If we walk into a cane field with fusarium or a banana field with fusarium and walk into another banana field, we're spreading it. The humans spread it. It's a fungus. So the alternative to that is going to be drones. And drones are out there now. And this is the way we have to go. And the question on insurance. In Belize, we have never had crop insurance. Mexico has, just over the river across from us. They were unable to harvest all the sugarcane. They identified the portion that was left out there because it was the miller's fault, and that is covered by the insurance. So they don't give you everything, but it has to be justified. I would love to have insurance in Belize. I think the farmers will make more money off collecting insurance right now than using it.
Okay, thank you. I will invite. Sorry.
Just very quickly, coming from Kabe, I think the opportunity here is that we actually need a mature market for particularly parametric-based insurance for agriculture. Because it is a tool in the box, in the toolbox for building resilience. But to underpin that, what you need is actually solid, localized data. Because right now, a lot of it's all that goes on in the model. And if the model is not fit for purpose or it's not localized enough, then you have people paying and not collecting, right? So a lot of them, they use these global climate models or even very regional climate models that might miss critical parameters that are impacting somebody who is 10 miles away or sometimes closer. So you need the data that is high resolution across the data, that now helps to price the insurance so that it's affordable. And we absolutely need that. I think it should be an option where farmers could have the choice of whether or not they want to purchase insurance to help them recover. Because ultimately, some people are do it as a livelihood. It is, somebody mentioned, is they want to send their kids to school and give their kids the best opportunities in life. So it's not a sort of a want to collect from your crop not surviving. You know, while you might have some bad actors in the space, but in Belize, as the minister rightly said, even if you wanted to buy it right now, there is no market. And I think the banks need to come together with the insurance companies and make it happen.
Thank you, Dr. Young. We have with us Professor Ratan Lal, the World Food Prize winner. He's going to make some closing remarks of this panel, and then we can finalize the program.
Mr. Chair, thank you so much. I really appreciated the comments made by very learned panelists, very educational to me. I want to begin with the last question that was asked there. You know, in '63, I was in college. That time, India has very serious food problem. And in the college, when you are 18, 19-year-old, we made a rule that we will miss every Monday food. That was the crisis we had. And then came the books, Paddock Brothers, India, Bangladesh are basket case. Forget about them. Let nature take its course. Then Lester Brown wrote an article, Who Will Feed China? That was about 20 years ago. You know the answer to who is feeding China and who is feeding India and Bangladesh. Who will feed Africa? Africa will. That has to be realized very soon. Nobody else will. Africa will. And Africa has the capacity to do it. Africa has the capacity to become the bread basket of the world. What is missing is the willpower of the people who make the decision, not the farmers. One other part about Africa I must mention, the average fertilizer used in Africa at present is 20 kilogram per hectare for whole of sub-Saharan Africa. The average fertilizer used in the world is 140 kilogram per hectare. We are mining nutrients at the rate of 40 to 50 kilogram per hectare NPK for the last several decades. And this mining has to stop. There is a law of return. And the law of return says you must return back to the land what you take from it. Land is like a bank account. You cannot keep withdrawing from it more than what you put into it. That's why I'm saying 20 kilogram per hectare fertilizer versus 140 kilogram per hectare. The other part which is very important, we keep on talking about drought and climate change. The only insurance about drought is irrigation. Africa's current land area under irrigation is 6%. It's 40% in India and China. And the flood and drought, it was discussed today, are the two sides of the same coin. When you do not manage the proper land properly, you got flood when it rains. And the same place where it had a flood, there's a drought, because water never infiltrated into the land. So that brings me to the question of one of the points was raised by the panelists, FEW, F-E-W. I think about 10 years ago, there was a meeting at Texas A&M, and I was a part of that meeting, where food, energy, water nexus was discussed. And in that, a book is published. Look up that book. I have a chapter in that book. And I said, it is not FEW, It's fuse, food, energy, water, soil nexus. Otherwise, the nexus never happens. And that's a very important part, fuse. That is the important part concept. The climate change, certainly the question came up, is not the only problem facing small farmers. And we have 550 million small farmers. Their problems are being multiplied by climate change. It's a multiplier. The land degradation problem, the flood drought syndrome, the disease problem, the crop yields of 13 kilogram per hectare cereals in sub-Saharan Africa compared to 4,000 kilogram per hectare per world. That problem is being multiplied. You know, the question was raised about vetiver amongst the panelists. You may be surprised who authored a book on vetiver. Very quick. It was Norman Borlaug. National Academy of Sciences had a book on vetiver by Dr. Norman Borlaug, 1989. My last point is to how to address this problem. And that addresses to reward farmer for payment for ecosystem services. And my suggestion is that is $100 billion per year. So that you pay farmer $50 per credit. And that's the only way we can put sustainable development goal on the track. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor Rao. Let me take this opportunity to thank all the panels. Can I just take one moment? Sorry. I don't know if that mic will work. We're honored to have with us here today the Prime Minister of Grenada. Thank you, Prime Minister Mitchell. Thank you for joining us, and I didn't know if anyone knew that, and so we just wanted to make sure that you knew that. Okay, good. We're honored to have you there. I'm sorry, Mohammed, carry on.